Nuome had said the words California model for the sixth time that evening, and his voice sat half a step higher than it had at the start. A tiny shift only people who live their lives on stages would have noticed. Across the table, Vance sat with his notebook closed and both hands flat on the surface. He had stopped writing 15 minutes earlier. There was nothing left to write. Everything he needed was already on the table. 40 minutes earlier, Nuome had walked into the Fox News studio and shaken every hand in the room. Fox had been building this for a month, the state of the states, a special debate. Vice President J.D. Vance versus California Governor Gavin Nuome, moderated by Brett Baier. The setup was simple. Two visions for America, two models of government, two men who each believed the other's approach was ruining the country. But Fox built a stage with two podiums, a moderator's desk, and a screen behind them that would show data as the debate unfolded. They expected ratings, but what they got was a demolition. Nuome arrived the way Newsom always arrives, like a man walking into a room he plans to own before he leaves it. He wore a dark suit that fit like it had been made for his body, because it had. His hair was flawless. His handshake was firm and warm, and timed to last exactly 2 seconds, long enough to feel real, short enough to feel busy. He greeted the Fox crew by name, asked a camera operator about her kid, and complimented Baier on his tie. He was charming in the way expensive things are charming, effortlessly, and with the quiet understanding that you are supposed to notice. His team was large: 2 senior advisors, a data analyst, a speech coach who had prepped him for the dentist debate, and a communications director already drafting post-debate clips for Instagram. They had prepared for everything. Nuome had debated on Fox before. He knew the terrain, knew the audience would be hostile, knew the moderator would push back. He had a strategy: stay presidential, cite California's GDP, pivot to national issues whenever the state's problems came up, and be the adult in the room. Vance arrived 12 minutes early. He carried a worn notebook and a single manila folder. He sat down, opened the notebook to a marked page, lined up 2 pens, and poured water from a pitcher that was already on the table. He did not greet the crew. He did not look at the audience. He read his notes. His suit was navy, and his shoes were scuffed at the toes. So he looked like a man getting ready for a long day at a job he took seriously, but did not enjoy. A Fox producer watching from the control room noticed that Vance's prep materials were thin, just the notebook and 1 folder. He mentioned it to the director. "Newsom's people brought a binder the size of a phone book," the producer said. The director shrugged. Maybe he doesn't need a binder. California's numbers are pretty hard to forget. Baier opened the debate, introduced both men, and explained the format. 7 topics, 2-minute opening statements, open exchange. He asked the first question: "Governor Nuome, you've described California as a model for the nation. Vice President Vance, you've called it a cautionary tale. So let's start with leadership. Governor, you first. Make the case for the California model." Nuome was ready, and he leaned forward, hands open, voice smooth. "Thank you, Brett. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. Not the country, the world. We lead the nation in technology, clean energy, venture capital investment, and agricultural output. We passed the most progressive climate legislation in the country. We've expanded health care access to millions. We've raised the minimum wage. We're building the first high-speed rail system in America. That is the California model: ambitious, innovative, and forward-looking. It was polished down to the last detail, with every sentence rehearsed and every data point chosen to impress. The delivery was smooth and confident, and it sounded exactly like a man who had practiced in front of a mirror, which he had. Vance opened his notebook. Governor, in November 2020, you issued orders telling 40 million Californians to stay home. No gatherings of more than 3 households, no Thanksgiving with family, no funerals for parents who died alone in hospitals. Restaurants closed, barbershops closed, churches closed, gyms closed, schools closed, and small businesses that had been in families for generations closed. He turned a page. On November 6, 2020, while those orders were in effect, you attended a birthday dinner at the French Laundry restaurant in Napa Valley. 12 guests, more than 3 households, $350 a person before wine. Photographs obtained by Fox 11 Los Angeles show you seated indoors, not outdoors as your office first claimed, without a mask and shoulder to shoulder with lobbyists from the California Medical Association. He placed a printout of the photograph on the table. A Nuome in a private dining room, no mask, 12 people. Sliding glass doors closed because the party was too loud. Your office first said the dinner was outdoors, but the photos show it was indoors. Your office said health protocols were followed, but the photos show no masks and no social distancing. The CEO of the California Medical Association sat to your right. His lobbyist sat to your left. The people who were supposed to advise you on public health were breaking public health rules at your dinner party. He turned a page. That same week, your children were attending their private school in Sacramento in person, with teachers in the room and classmates at their desks. Meanwhile, millions of California children were sitting in front of laptops in their bedrooms, trying to learn through a screen. They were falling behind in math and reading. They were losing social skills. Pediatricians were reporting anxiety and depression in children at rates they called unprecedented. He turned another page. Also during this period, California's Employment Development Department was mailing unemployment checks to people who were out of work because of your shutdown orders. Except the system was so broken that it was also mailing checks to prisoners, dead people, and identity thieves in other states. $33 billion in fraudulent payments, but we'll get to that. Vance did not raise his voice. He read the facts the way a man reads a utility bill, because the numbers are the numbers, and they do not need emphasis. Governor, you told families they could not hold funerals. People sat in hospital parking lots, while their parents died alone inside because visitors were not allowed. Restaurant owners shut down businesses their grandparents built. Barbers, hairdressers, gym owners, and church pastors all followed the rules. They sacrificed, they lost income, they lost savings, and some of them lost everything. Then you sat down to a $350 dinner with lobbyists, and your children went to class the next morning at a school most California parents could not afford. And when you got caught, you said, "I made a bad mistake." Nuome started to answer, "I've acknowledged that was a mistake. I apologized publicly, and You called it a mistake," Vance said. Rosa Martinez, who owned a Mexican restaurant in Fresno for 22 years, called it something else when she closed for good that December. She called it the end. And she could not survive 3 months of shutdown while following your rules. You survived a $350 dinner just fine. Kevin Falconer, who was mayor of San Diego at the time, said it best. His kids can learn in person, but yours can't. He can celebrate birthday parties, but you can't. He can dine on a $350 meal at one of the fanciest restaurants in the world during the worst recession in a generation, but you definitely can't. He closed the page. Governor, how did that work out for the people who followed your rules while you broke them? Nuome straightened in his chair. The question landed, but he was a professional. He pivoted to the economy, to job recovery, to federal relief funds. Vance let him talk. Then he opened the next section of his notebook. Governor, let's talk about where you come from, not politically, personally. Because you talk a lot about fighting for working families, and I want the audience to understand your background. He read from public records the way a clerk reads into a court transcript. Your father, William Newham, was an attorney for Getty Oil and a close personal friend of Gordon Getty, heir to the Getty oil fortune and one of the wealthiest families in American history. Gordon Getty invested in 10 of your first 11 business ventures. He has said publicly to the San Francisco Chronicle that he treated you like a son. Your first company, Plumpjack Winery, was launched with Getty's financial backing in 1992. You were 24 years old. Most 24-year-olds are paying off student loans. You were opening a winery with a billionaire's money. Vance turned a page. Plumpjack grew into 23 businesses, wineries, restaurants, hotels, all built on Getty capital, all built on a relationship that began because your father managed the Getty Family Trust. This is not self-made success, Governor. This is inherited access dressed up as entrepreneurship. He turned another page. Your political career began when Willie Brown, the most powerful political figure in San Francisco, a man the press called the Ayatollah of the Assembly, appointed you to the city's Parking and Traffic Commission in 1996. You were 29. You had no government experience. Brown then appointed you to the Board of Supervisors. You were elected mayor of San Francisco in 2003. He added a detail without emphasis. During your time as mayor, you had an affair with Ruby Rippey Torquay, your campaign manager's wife, and your appointment secretary. Your campaign manager, Alex Torquay, discovered the affair and filed for divorce. He had been one of your closest allies. The scandal became public in 2007. In most American cities, an elected official sleeping with a subordinate, who is also the wife of his campaign manager, would end a career. In San Francisco, you apologized on television, entered alcohol counseling, and kept governing. You were re-elected. He set down the notebook. As governor, you moved your family into a multi-million-dollar home in Fair Oaks instead of the governor's mansion that Jerry Brown had renovated with state funds. You enrolled your children in a private school with annual tuition that costs more than many California families earn in a month. Then Vance talked about himself briefly, the way he always did. Not as a performance, but as counter-evidence. My mother was a heroin addict, yet not struggled with addiction. She was an addict. My father left before I could remember his face. My grandmother raised me in Middletown, Ohio, a town where the Armco steel mill had closed and the jobs it supported died with it. Heroin filled the gap. Half the kids I grew up with ended up in prison or dead or close to both. I joined the Marines because a recruiter came to my high school, and it was the first door anyone had ever opened for me. I served in Iraq. I came home and went to Ohio State on the GI Bill, then Yale Law School. I wrote a book about what happened to my town and my family. Nobody invested in my first business. Nobody appointed me to a commission. Nobody's billionaire friend bankrolled my career. He looked at Newham. Governor, you grew up in a house where a billionaire sent Christmas presents so expensive your mother returned them for store credit. Your memoir says it. The gifts from the Gettys that were too lavish. The trips with the Getty family. The hot air balloon safari. The meeting with King Juan Carlos of Spain. I grew up in a house where I called 911 for my mother when I was 13, and the paramedics knew the address because they had been there before. He did not say, "You are a fraud." He did not say, "You don't understand working people." He put two childhoods next to each other on a table and let the audience measure the distance. Governor, you have spent your career talking about inequality. You are inequality. You just happen to be on the comfortable side of it. Newsom said my family faced financial challenges too, and my father donated much of his income, and my mother. Your father donated his income while his friend Gordon Getty funded your businesses with millions. Vance said, "That is not financial hardship, Governor. That is philanthropy with a backup plan. I don't begrudge you your upbringing. I begrudge you pretending it was something it wasn't." He moved on. Beyer tried to steer the conversation. "Let's talk about California's economy and population trends." "Yes," Vance said. "Let's." He opened his folder for the first time. Inside was a single sheet of paper with numbers printed in large type. He held it up briefly so the camera behind Beyer could catch the layout. A clean list with years on the left and numbers on the right. More than 4 million people have left California for other states since the year 2000. 817,000 in 2022 alone. But 200,000 of those were college-educated adults, the doctors, engineers, teachers, and entrepreneurs who built the economy you're claiming credit for. They did not go to Oregon or Washington. They went to Texas, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, states with Republican governors, lower taxes, and cheaper housing. He looked at the camera. 4 million people. That is not a statistic. That is 4 million individual decisions. 4 million families who sat at kitchen tables and decided we cannot do this anymore. 4 million times someone looked at their rent, looked at their paycheck, looked at the gas prices and the grocery bills and the school quality and the traffic, and said, "We're leaving." Nobody forced them, nobody deported them. They chose to go, and they chose to go to the states you call backward. And he read more numbers from the sheet. Cost of living in California, $26,478 higher per year for a middle-class family than the national average. That means a family in California earning $100,000 a year has the purchasing power of a family earning $73,000 anywhere else. Median home price, $874,000, more than 4 times the national median. Electricity, 32.68 per kilowatt hour, nearly double the national average and climbing. Rates increased 11% from 2023 to 2024 alone. He set the sheet down. Gas prices, California has the highest gas tax in the country, and consistently the highest or second highest gas prices. You signed legislation creating a gas price gouging penalty that even your own economists warned would raise prices, not lower them. It did. Prices went up because that is what happens when you add costs to a supply chain. The costs get passed to consumers. This is not complicated economics. This is Tuesday. Newome interjected, "California is still the 5th largest economy in the world. Our GDP exceeds that of most nations. Governor, you keep saying 5th largest economy. You've said it 6 times tonight. I've been counting." Vance leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you a question that the 5th largest economy ought to be able to answer. If California's model works, if the taxes and the regulations and the spending produce results, why are 4 million people leaving? If the store is so great, why are the customers walking out?" He did not wait for an answer. "I'll tell you where they're going. They're going to states with lower taxes, lower cost of living, less regulation, and more affordable housing. States where a middle-class family can buy a house. States where electricity does not cost double. States where you can open a small business without hiring a compliance attorney first." He read from a second list. Tesla moved its headquarters from California to Texas. Elon Musk said publicly that the reason was California's regulatory environment. Oracle moved to Texas. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise moved to Texas. Charles Schwab moved to Texas. Palantir moved to Denver. Remington moved manufacturing to Georgia. These are not food trucks, Governor. These are the companies that made Silicon Valley. They built the California economy, and then they left. What does it say when the builders leave the building? Nuome started talking about California's progressive tax system and how it was fairer than Texas's regressive one. He cited data showing low-income earners pay a larger share of their income in taxes in Texas. Vance let him finish every word. Governor, that's a fine argument. I'm sure the 4 million people loading their belongings into a U-Haul on the 405 freeway will find it very comforting. You can explain to them that the tax structure is theoretically fairer while they drive to a state where they can actually afford to live. He closed the folder. Governor, how did that work out? Because 4 million people already gave you their answer with a U-Haul. Nuome's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, the only unscripted one he had made all evening. The camera caught it. Vance moved to homelessness. His voice did not change, still that flat, factual register, but the numbers were worse, and the room felt it. When you were mayor of San Francisco, you said you would end homelessness in the city. That was 2004, 21 years ago. Since you became governor, California has spent more than $24 billion on homelessness prevention programs. $24 billion, and to put that in perspective, that is more than the entire annual budget of 12 U.S. states. He paused. Result: homelessness in California increased 31.6% over the same period. Homelessness nationally decreased 10%. The rest of the country got better. Your state got worse. Not by a little, by a third. He pulled out a data sheet. 188,000 homeless people in California in 2024, the highest number in the state's history. More homeless people than any other state, more than the next 2 states combined. You have been in office for 7 years, and homelessness has increased every single year. Vance looked at Nuome. $24 billion, and more people sleeping on the streets than when you started, Governor. Where did the money go? Your own state auditor could not fully account for it. You failed to track where the spending went, or whether it worked. $24 billion with no accountability, no tracking, and no results. He added that your approach is called housing first. The theory is that giving a homeless person a roof over their head will solve the problem. But 75% of chronically homeless people have substance abuse problems or severe mental illness. That comes from the American Journal of Community Psychology, not from me. Your state rules bar funding for homeless programs that enforce drug rules or require mental health treatment. And you are giving people a room and then telling the people running the program that they cannot require sobriety or mental health care. You are putting a roof on a house with no foundation. He added the detail he had saved for last. In November 2023, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit was held in San Francisco. President Xi Jinping of China attended, and something remarkable happened. He spoke more slowly now, every sentence separated by a breath. The streets of San Francisco were suddenly clean. The tent encampments vanished overnight. The sidewalks were pressure-washed. The human waste was gone. The needles were gone. The zombified people who had been shuffling down Market Street for years were gone. The city that had been drowning in visible human suffering was suddenly presentable, even sparkling, for the president of China. So he let the pause sit for 5 seconds, and then President Xi left, and the tents came back, and the people came back, and the needles came back, and the smell came back. Everything that had been cleaned for the Chinese president returned the moment he got on his airplane. He looked at Nuomi. "Governor, you proved something that night. You proved that you can solve homelessness in San Francisco whenever you choose to. The resources are there, the capacity is there, the will is there. When the cameras belong to the international press, you cleaned the streets for a foreign leader and left them to rot for the citizens who elected you." Nuome said the APEC cleanup was part of a broader public safety initiative. Vance said you cleaned the streets for Xi Jinping and let them stay dirty for the people who pay your salary, Governor. How did that work out? Nuome's communications director, watching from the green room, stopped drafting Instagram clips. She opened a blank document and started writing a post-debate statement instead. Vance's voice changed when he reached the fraud section, not louder, just harder, the way a surface hardens when the temperature drops. "Governor, when you shut down California's economy in 2020, millions of people lost their jobs not because they wanted to stop working, but because you told them to. You issued the orders, businesses closed, and millions of newly unemployed Californians filed claims with your Employment Development Department." He paused. The EDD was not ready. It was running on 1980s technology. It was understaffed, it was overwhelmed, and in the chaos, your department paid out $33 billion in fraudulent unemployment claims. And he let the number settle. $33 billion! Inmates in California state prisons received unemployment checks. People who were, by definition, not unemployed because they were incarcerated. Dead people received unemployment checks. People in other states, people who had never lived in California, never worked in California, never even set foot in California, filed claims and received checks. International crime rings filed thousands of claims using stolen identities, and your department paid every single one for months without catching it. He turned a page. When the fraud was finally detected, not by your administration, but by banks and law enforcement agencies that noticed the patterns, the first estimate was $20 billion. Then it climbed to $31 billion, then $33 billion. Some estimates put it higher, and your own auditors said the final number may never be known. He added a detail that seemed small, but landed hard. A recent state audit also found that the EDD wasted $4.6 million paying monthly service fees for more than 6,200 cell phones that went unused for at least 4 straight months. Some of those phones sat in a drawer unused for over 4 years, while the state paid the bill every month. 6,000 phones sitting in drawers, billing the taxpayer. He moved to the next item without transition. In November 2025, your former Chief of Staff, Dana Williamson, was indicted by a federal grand jury on 23 counts of bank fraud and wire fraud. The charges cover actions taken from 2022 to 2024 while she was working for you in your office as the person who managed your daily operations. He read from the indictment summary. According to prosecutors, she falsely claimed more than $1.7 million in fraudulent business expenses on her tax returns. The expenses included a $15,000 Chanel handbag, a chartered private jet, and a $170,000 birthday trip to Mexico, all claimed as business expenses, all allegedly fraudulent. Vance did not editorialize. He read the charges the way they were written, dry, specific, devastating in their specificity. 5 co-conspirators were also indicted, including the former Chief of Staff of Xavier Becerra. They allegedly funneled $225,000 from a dormant campaign account. Prosecutors say the investigation produced 27,000 pages of documents and 750 gigabytes of evidence. He looked at Nuome, your Chief of Staff, the person who sat outside your office every day, who managed your schedule, your staff, your priorities, your administration's daily operations, to 23 counts of federal fraud committed while she worked for you, a Chanel bag and a private jet on the taxpayer's dime, and your spokesperson said you expect all public servants to uphold the highest standards of integrity. Apparently, nobody told your chief of staff. He added that 7 state agencies under your administration are now classified as high risk by the California State Auditor. That designation is reserved for agencies with major waste, fraud, abuse, or severe mismanagement. 7 agencies, $76 billion in combined high-risk operations. The EDD is on that list. The Department of Health Care Services, which runs Medi-Cal, is on that list. The Department of Social Services is on that list. He closed the folder. $33 billion in unemployment fraud, a chief of staff indicted for wire fraud, 7 agencies flagged for mismanagement, and $76 billion in high-risk operations. Governor, at some point this stops being bad luck. It stops being systemic challenges. It stops being the pandemic. And it starts being your administration, your leadership, your responsibility. Nuome said every state dealt with pandemic fraud, the federal government's own programs. Vance said every state dealt with some fraud. Your state dealt with $33 billion of it. That's not some, Governor. That's a world record. Vance picked up speed. The notebook pages turned faster. The debate's pace shifted, not frantic but compressed, the way information compresses when there is too much of it and not enough time, and the person delivering it has decided to let volume do the work that emphasis usually does. Education, let's talk about your children, Governor, and then let's talk about everyone else's. So he read from test scores published by the California Department of Education. 2/3 of California students fail to meet state math standards. That is not my number. That is your Department of Education's number. 2 out of every 3 children in your state cannot do math at grade level. More than half fail to meet English standards. More than half of California's children cannot read and write at the level their grade requires. He let the numbers sit. These test scores reflect years of policy, years of your policy. The school shutdowns you ordered lasted longer in California than in almost any other state. Some California schools were closed for more than a year. Children learned through screens while their teachers taught through screens. And everyone pretended this was education. It wasn't. It was daycare by laptop. And the results are on the wall. He turned a page. Your children attended private school during the shutdowns, in person, teachers in the room, classmates at the desks. The same experience public school children were denied by your executive orders was available to your children because you could afford $12,000 a year in tuition. The children of California's working families, the families you say you represent, got Zoom, your children got school. He moved to crime. Proposition 47, which you championed, reclassified drug possession and theft under $950 as misdemeanors. Proposition 57, which you also championed, allowed early release for certain felons. The theory was that reducing penalties would reduce incarceration and save money. He read the results. Motor vehicle theft up 32.3%, larceny and theft up 30.4%, carjackings up 21.1%, destruction of property up 12.8%, assaults up 11.4%, burglaries up 10.3%. 9 of 14 crime categories tracked by the city government went up. These are not my numbers. These are posted on the city and state government websites. He corrected himself without embarrassment. A slip acknowledged, and then moved past, making him more human, not less. When California voters passed Proposition 36 in November 2024 to reverse some of these changes, overwhelmingly and by a wide margin, you opposed it. The voters of your own state looked at the results of your criminal justice reforms and said, "This isn't working." And you told them they were wrong. He added one more item: wildfires. Your administration claimed to have treated hundreds of thousands of acres with fuel breaks and prescribed burns to prevent wildfires. An investigation by NPR and Cap Radio found that you overstated the acreage by 690%, not 69%. Governor, 690. You told the public you had treated 7 times more land than you actually had while California was burning. He closed the notebook. 2/3 of your students cannot do math. Your children go to private school. Crime went up after you cut penalties. Voters reversed your policy, and you fought them. And you exaggerated wildfire prevention by 700% while homes burned. Governor, how did that work out? Nuome started to answer with something about systemic challenges, federal funding shortfalls, and climate change making wildfires worse. He was talking about context. Vance was reading numbers. The audience could see both men, one explaining, one waiting, and the contrast told the story without narration. Vance stood up, and he left the notebook on the table. He did not need it. Governor Nuomo wants to be President of the United States. He's been running for it since before he admitted he was running for it. He's been doing national interviews, building a national profile, and positioning himself as the Democratic frontrunner for 2028. So let's look at the resume he is submitting to the American people. He spoke to the camera, not to Nuome, not to Bayer, but to the people watching at home. He was raised on Getty money. He was appointed to his first political post by a political boss. He built his businesses with a billionaire's investment. He had an affair with his campaign manager's wife. As governor, he ordered Californians to stay home and then went to a $350 dinner with lobbyists. His children went to private school while public schools were shut. When his Employment Development Department sent out $33 billion in fraudulent payments. His chief of staff was indicted on 23 counts of fraud. He spent $24 billion on homelessness, and homelessness went up 31%. 4 million people left his state. 2/3 of his students cannot do math. He overstated wildfire prevention by 690%. 7 of his agencies are classified as high risk for waste, fraud, and abuse. His state has the highest cost of living, the highest electricity prices, and the highest homelessness rate in the country. Vance paused, and his one signature infrastructure project, the thing he points to as proof that California builds the future, is a high-speed rail line between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It was approved by voters in 2008 with an estimated cost of $33 billion. The current estimate is $128 billion, nearly 4 times the original price. It has been under construction for more than a decade. Not a single passenger has ridden it. Not one. The completion date has been pushed back so many times that the California High-Speed Rail Authority stopped publishing target dates. They stopped telling people when the train would be done because they do not know. He added one more item, something Nuome probably hoped he had forgotten. When you ran for governor, you promised to build 3.5 million homes by 2025. That was the number, 3.5 million. In the 7 years since you took office, about 640,000 homes have been built. Not 3.5 million, 640,000. When reporters asked about the gap, you called the original promise a stretch goal. 3.5 million was a stretch goal, Governor. In any other profession, missing your target by 82% gets you fired. In California, politics, it gets you a presidential campaign. He paused. $128 billion for a train that does not exist, 3.5 million homes that were never built, in a state that cannot house its homeless, cannot educate its children, and cannot stop its residents from leaving. That is not a model, Governor. That is a warning. He looked at Nuome. That is the California model. That is your resume. And you want to do this to the whole country. He sat down. His hands returned to the table. His notebook stayed closed. How did that work out, Governor? For anyone except you. The studio was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before applause, but the kind that settles in when a room full of people is processing something they already knew, but had never heard assembled in one place, in one sequence, by one person who had not raised his voice once. The buyer looked at Nuome. Governor, you have 2 minutes. Nuome straightened his tie. He smiled. That automatic smile that switches on when the rest of the face has not decided what to do yet. He started talking about California's innovation economy, about climate leadership, about the future, about vision. He talked about what California could be. He did not talk about what California is. He did not address the $33 billion in EDD fraud. He did not address the chief of staff indictment. He did not address the 4 million people who left. He did not address the $24 billion in homelessness spending that produced more homelessness. He did not address the French Laundry. He did not address the high-speed rail cost overrun. He did not address the 2/3 of students who cannot do math. He did not address the Xi Jinping street cleanup. And he talked about the future because the past was sitting on the table in front of him in a notebook and a folder, and he could not make it disappear. So he did what Gavin Newsom always does when the present cannot be defended. He sold the future. He painted a picture of a California that does not exist yet, and asked the audience to believe in it. It was the same skill that had carried him from the Getty living room to the governor's mansion, the ability to make people look where you are pointing instead of where you are standing. But the audience had just spent 40 minutes looking at where he was standing, and no amount of pointing was going to change what they had seen. He finished. Buyer thanked both participants. The audience applauded, one side with energy, and the other with the careful restraint of people who know they have just watched something they will need to discuss in the car on the way home. Nuome left the stage with his team closing around him like a protective formation. He was still smiling. He shook Buyer's hand firmly. 2 seconds. Eye contact. He waved to the audience. He looked exactly like a man who had just won, which is what Gavin Newsom always looks like no matter what just happened. It was his greatest skill, and on this night it was also his most visible flaw, because the gap between how he looked and what had just happened was so wide that the smile itself became evidence. Evidence that here was a man more practiced at performing victory than earning it. Vance left the stage carrying his notebook under his arm. A Fox producer asked if he wanted to do a post-debate hit. He said yes, sat down in the analysis chair, and answered 3 questions in a total of 90 seconds. Then he stood up, shook the producer's hand, and walked to the parking lot. The first clip to go viral was not the French Laundry section, and it was not the homelessness numbers or the EDD fraud. It was a 13-second clip from the middle of the debate, the moment Vance said 4 million people already gave you their answer with a U-Haul, because it was short enough to fit in a text message and devastating enough that it did not need context. 31 million views in 72 hours. The second clip was the Xi Jinping cleanup. You cleaned the streets for the president of China and let them stay dirty for the people who pay your salary. 23 million views. Shared not just by conservatives, but by San Francisco residents who had watched their sidewalks get pressure washed for a foreign dignitary and then return to filth the following week. People who had voted for Newsom shared that clip. People who had donated to his campaigns shared it, because they had lived it. The third clip was the full closing statement, Vance reading the resume item by item, while Newome sat 3 feet away and listened. Someone on social media put a timer in the corner of the screen, counting the seconds of silence between each item. The timer became the point. Each fact got 3 seconds of dead air. Each 3 seconds was heavier than the one before. The full closing ran for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. It felt like an hour. CNN's coverage was cautious, with a panel of 4 analysts agreeing that the debate had been substantive and that Vance had been well prepared. One analyst noted that Governor Newome was unable to effectively counter the specific data points Vance presented about California's outcomes. Another said more bluntly, "You can't debate your own state's audit report. The numbers are the numbers." MSNBC's coverage focused on framing. The lead analyst called it a Fox News production designed to embarrass a Democratic governor. The network brought in a California-based economist to defend the state's economic record. The economist confirmed that California was indeed the 5th largest economy in the world. When asked about the 4 million people leaving the state, the economist said population dynamics are complex and influenced by many factors, so including housing costs that predate Governor Newome. It was a factual answer, but also the kind of answer that convinces nobody, because 4 million people do not leave a place because of complex dynamics. They leave because they cannot afford to stay. In Fresno, the building that used to be Rosa's Kitchen, the Mexican restaurant that closed in December 2020, was now a cell phone repair shop. Rosa Martinez did not watch the debate. She had stopped watching political television 3 years earlier. But her daughter did. And the next morning she called her mother and told her that someone on TV had talked about restaurants that closed during the lockdown while the governor ate at the French Laundry. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He ate there, and I lost everything, and he's still governor." She paused. "Tell me something I don't know." On Interstate 10, heading east out of California toward Phoenix, a family in a loaded Subaru heard the debate on satellite radio. The car was packed to the ceiling. Boxes, garbage bags full of clothes, a child's bicycle strapped to the roof rack. When Vance said, 4 million people already gave you their answer with a U-Haul, the woman in the passenger seat looked at her husband. Neither of them said anything, because they did not need to. The Subaru was their answer. The boxes in the trunk were their answer. The California plates they would switch to Arizona plates at the DMV next Tuesday were their answer. In Oakland, a 3rd-grade teacher named Diane Chen watched the debate in her apartment after grading papers. When Vance read the number 2/3 of California students failed to meet math standards, she put down her pen. She had been teaching for 11 years, and she knew the number was accurate because she saw it every day, in every frustrated 8-year-old who had lost 2 years to a laptop screen, while the governor's children learned in person at a $12,000 a year private school 10 miles away. The next morning, she printed the statistic on a sheet of paper and taped it to the bulletin board in the teacher's lounge. She did not write a source, and she did not write a comment. Everyone who read it knew exactly where it came from and exactly what it meant. It was still there at the end of the school year. In Sacramento, Newsom's office held a post-debate strategy session that lasted until 2 a.m. The speech coach who had prepped him for the dentist debate sat quietly in the corner. The data analyst pulled up California's own audit reports and confirmed, on one by one, that every number Vance had cited was accurate. Not approximately accurate, exactly accurate, down to the decimal point on the electricity rates. The communications director drafted and deleted 4 different response strategies before settling on one. Ignore the specifics. repeat the fifth largest economy line, and pivot to attacking Fox News as a biased platform. It was the same strategy they always used. The question was whether it would still work now that 14 million people had heard the numbers. Nuome's post-debate Instagram post went up at 11:15 p.m. A professional photo of him at the podium looking presidential, with the caption, "Cal is the fifth largest economy in the world. No debate changes that." The top comment, with 63,000 likes, was 4 words. How'd that work out? And the second comment said fifth largest economy and first in homelessness. The third said, tell that to the 4 million people who left. Within a week, how'd that work out had moved from the debate into everyday language. It showed up in op-eds about government spending. It showed up at school board meetings when administrators cited programs without results. It showed up on bumper stickers not mass-produced by a campaign, but printed at home by people who had never watched Fox News in their lives and had watched a 13-second clip of a man asking a simple question that another man could not answer. It showed up at city council meetings in California when residents questioned homelessness spending. It showed up at PTA meetings when parents asked about test scores. And it became the 4-word audit citizens could apply to any politician who promised results and delivered reports. A reporter asked Vance about the debate 2 days later at an unrelated press briefing about trade policy. Vice President Vance, your debate with Governor Nuome has been called the most effective political demolition since. Vance raised a hand. I didn't demolish anyone. I read California's own numbers, state audits, census data, Department of Education test scores, California High-Speed Rail Authority budget projections. If reading a state's report card out loud counts as a demolition, that tells you more about the report card than about me. He returned to trade policy. The reporter did not follow up. There was nothing to follow up on. The numbers were the numbers, and they had always been the numbers. And the only thing that changed was that someone had finally read them out loud, in order, on camera, while the man responsible for them sat 3 feet away and could not explain a single one. And every time after that, every time Gavin Nuome stood at a podium and said the words, California model, every time he talked about innovation and vision and the 5th largest economy in the world, every time he smiled that perfect smile and straightened that perfect tie and delivered that perfect performance about the future of a state whose present was documented in audit reports he hoped nobody would read. Somewhere in the room or in the comments or in the quiet calculation of every voter who was listening, a question sat like a stone at the bottom of a glass. How'd that work out, Governor?